The evening sky burned with streaks of orange and red as the sun dipped behind the distant mesas. The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush and dust across the desolate plain, whispering through the brittle grass. A creaking wagon rolled slowly along a narrow trail, its wooden wheels groaning under the strain. Inside, a woman clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, her face pale and tired from the long journey. Beside her sat a young girl, no more than 8, her wide blue eyes scanning the horizon with a mix of curiosity and fear. They had been traveling for days without seeing another soul, and the silence of the wilderness had begun to feel alive, as if watching them. The man driving the wagon kept glancing back, his brow slick with sweat, even as the cool air of evening settled in. He was a tall, lean figure with a weathered face and eyes that held too much worry. Every sound made him tense: the distant cry of a coyote, the rustle of the wind through the rocks, the creak of leather straps. His rifle rested across his knees, loaded and ready. The woman had stopped asking him questions hours ago. She could see that his mind was consumed by something darker than the fading light. They were heading west, chasing rumors of safer land beyond the mountains, a place untouched by war or hunger. But the frontier was not a gentle place. The vast openness that promised freedom also hid danger in every shadow. The Apaches were restless, the man had said. There had been raids on settlements, and travelers had vanished without a trace. He had sworn they'd make it through if they had just kept moving, if they had stayed alert. But deep down, even he knew the wilderness didn't always let people pass untested. As night crept closer, the man slowed the wagon and glanced toward a cluster of rocks near a dry creek bed. "We'll stop here," he said quietly. The woman nodded, too weary to argue. The child leaned against her, half asleep, while the man jumped down to unhitch the horses. The world around them was silent except for the low whisper of the wind and the soft shuffle of the horses' hooves. A thin sliver of moon hung above, pale and sharp against the darkening sky. They built a small fire, careful to keep it low. The woman sat close to the flames, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "Do you think we're close to the river?" she asked softly. The man didn't answer at first. He stared into the distance, his eyes narrowing. "We'll find it by morning," he said finally. "We'll have to." But even as he spoke, his gaze kept drifting to the darkness beyond the firelight. The vast open night pressed against them, heavy and watchful. The little girl stirred and reached for her mother's hand. "Mama, are there bad men out here?" she whispered. The woman hesitated, then smiled faintly and smoothed the child's hair. "No, sweetheart. Just the wind playing tricks on us." She tried to sound calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She could feel it too, the sense that they were not alone. The man stood and moved a few steps away, scanning the dark horizon. He listened, waiting. At first there was only the crackle of the fire. Then came a faint sound, so distant it could have been mistaken for the wind hooves. Slow, steady, and deliberate. His stomach dropped. He turned sharply toward the wagon. "Put the fire out," he said under his breath. The woman looked at him, confused. "What is it? Do it," he snapped. She hurried to smother the flames, her hands trembling as she threw sand over the embers. The night swallowed them. The faint sound of horses grew louder, closer. The woman pulled her daughter close, holding her so tightly the child whimpered. The man raised his rifle, his breath shallow. He could see shapes, now dark figures moving against the moonlight. 1, 2, then more. The man's hand shook, but he didn't fire. He knew there was no use in shooting unless he had to. There were too many of them. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, his silhouette outlined by the pale glow of the moon. The Apache warrior sat still upon his horse, his long hair moving in the wind, his eyes fixed on the wagon. His expression was calm but unreadable. Around him, several others waited silently, watching. The man lowered his rifle slightly, his throat dry. "We don't want trouble," he said in a strained voice. "We're just passing through." The warrior said nothing. He dismounted slowly, his movements smooth and deliberate, then walked toward them. The woman's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. The Apache stopped a few feet away. He looked at the man, then at the woman, then his gaze fell on the little girl clutching her mother's skirt. Something flickered in his eyes, a glint of curiosity, or perhaps sorrow, but it was gone as quickly as it came. The man tried again. "We've got no fight with you. Take what you want. Just leave us be." He gestured toward the wagon. "There's food, some tools, even the horses if you need them." The warrior's eyes narrowed. Took another step forward, and the man raised the rifle again. In that tense heartbeat, the woman realized what was about to happen. She threw herself forward, arms outstretched. "Please," she cried. "Take me if you must, but not the child." Her voice cracked in desperation. "Take her, not me." But the warrior's face didn't change. He looked at her, then at the little girl again. The air between them was thick with fear, the silence almost unbearable. The man's finger trembled on the trigger. "Stay back," he shouted. The warrior didn't move. Then, in one quick motion, everything exploded into chaos. The rifle fired, the horses reared, the woman screamed. When the smoke cleared, the man was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. The woman fell to her knees beside him, sobbing. The Apache warrior stood still, untouched, his eyes cold and focused. Behind him, his men waited for a signal that never came. He looked at the woman again, then turned toward the child. Slowly, he walked forward. The woman tried to shield her daughter, but he grabbed her wrist with surprising gentleness. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face.
"I doubt to take her.
She's all I have." The warrior's grip tightened, then loosened. For a moment, it seemed as if he might turn away. But instead, he stepped closer, his voice low and firm. He said simply. The woman froze, not understanding. "What?" He looked her in the eyes. "Both." Before she could react, he motioned to his men. Two of them dismounted and approached quickly. The child cried out as she was lifted from the ground. The woman struggled, clawing at their arms, but they were too strong. The man tried to rise, but his strength was gone. The last thing he saw was his wife and daughter being led into the shadows, the Apache warrior following silently behind. The night grew quiet again, the echoes of the chaos fading into the dark. The wind swept across the plain, carrying with it the faint smell of gunpowder and sorrow. In the distance, the moonlight glinted on the warriors' horses as they vanished into the wilderness. The man lay alone beside the dying fire, his breath shallow, the stars blurring above him. Somewhere out there, beyond the rocks and shadows, the woman and her child were being taken into the unknown, two lives bound by fear and fate, carried deeper into the heart of a land that showed no mercy. The prairie was still once more, but the silence that followed was not peace. It was the heavy quiet that comes before something greater, something that would change them all forever. The night stretched on endlessly as the woman and her daughter were led deeper into the wild country. The Apache riders moved in near silence, their horses sure-footed even across the rocky ground. The moonlight carved their faces into shadows, revealing little emotion and offering no comfort. The woman clutched her daughter close whenever the horse slowed, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She could still hear the gunshot echoing in her head, still see the image of her husband lying by the dying fire. Every mile they rode carried her farther from everything she knew and closer to something she didn't understand. The Apache warrior who had spoken only a few words earlier rode at the front. His back was straight, his movements calm, but his presence carried a quiet authority. The others followed his lead without question. The woman's mind raced as she studied him. Why had he taken them both? Why not leave her or the child behind? She wanted to believe there was reason in it, but fear clouded every thought. Her daughter's small hand tightened around hers, and she forced herself to stay composed. Panic would only make things worse. As dawn crept over the horizon, the riders slowed and finally stopped near a grove of cottonwoods. A stream ran nearby, its soft murmur breaking the silence. The Apaches dismounted, speaking quietly among themselves. The warrior who led them gestured for the woman to get down. She obeyed, her legs weak and shaking as her boots touched the earth. The little girl clung to her side, her face streaked with tears and dust. The warrior looked at them for a long moment before speaking. His voice was steady, his English clear, though marked by a rough accent. "You ride no more today. Rest." Then he turned and walked away. The woman didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. She gathered her daughter near the stream and knelt to help her drink. The cold water stung her cracked lips, but it felt like a small mercy. Around them, the warriors unpacked their gear, moving with the quiet rhythm of men used to hardship. They lit no fire, only ate dried meat and roots. She noticed how little they wasted, how carefully they watched the land. Every gesture seemed deliberate, shaped by survival. Her daughter looked up at her. "Mama, are they going to hurt us?" The words broke her heart. She brushed the child's hair from her face. "No, sweetheart, we'll be all right." She said it softly, though she didn't believe it herself. She turned her eyes toward the warrior, sitting apart from the rest, sharpening a knife on a stone. There was no cruelty in his expression, but no kindness either. He was unreadable, carved from the same earth that surrounded them. As the sun climbed higher, the heat began to press down. The woman's dress was heavy with dust, and her throat ached with thirst. The Apaches barely seemed to notice the temperature. They sat beneath the sparse shade, speaking little. Why? She wondered if they meant to take her to a village, or if she and her child were to be traded, used as bargaining pieces for something larger.
Oh, yeah.
The idea made her stomach twist. Yet, despite the fear, there was something strange about the warrior's eyes when he had looked at them. It wasn't hatred, like he carried his own ghosts. The hours passed slowly, and the riders finally mounted again. The warrior motioned for her to get back on the horse. She hesitated, still weak from exhaustion, but one of the younger warriors reached down and lifted the child up first. The woman climbed up after her, her body aching. They rode on again, heading farther into the hills, where the land turned rugged and wild. The trail wound through narrow canyons, where the red cliffs rose high above, blotting out the sky. Each turn felt like it could lead to their end, but the warrior seemed to know every stone, every bend. By nightfall, they reached a hidden valley dotted with brush and tall pines. The sound of crickets filled the air, blending with the soft murmur of the wind. The riders dismounted and began to set up camp. It was clear this place was familiar to them. There were signs of older fires and a few rough shelters made of branches and hide. The woman watched quietly as they worked. When one of them offered her a small bundle of roasted corn, she accepted it with trembling hands. Hunger overcame fear for a moment as she and her daughter ate in silence. When darkness settled, the warrior came to her again. He crouched beside her, his face half in shadow. "You are far from your people," he said quietly. She nodded, unsure what to say. "You killed one of them," she whispered, her voice breaking. His expression did not change. He raised his gun. "I did what I must." There was no anger in his tone, only fact. She looked away, tears filling her eyes. "He was trying to protect us." The warrior was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You think all my people are killers?" She didn't answer, stood and stepped back, the faint firelight flickering over his face. "We protect our own too." Then he walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The woman lay awake for hours, holding her daughter close. The stars above seemed sharper, colder here, as if the sky itself watched without pity. She wondered if anyone would ever find them, or if the wilderness would swallow them whole. Yet beneath the fear, another feeling stirred, a faint curiosity about the man who led them. He didn't act like the stories she had heard from travelers, tales filled with cruelty and blood. He was harsh, yes, but there was something human beneath the hardness. She couldn't tell if that made things better or worse. The next morning brought a thin mist that clung to the valley. The Apaches moved early, tending to their horses and preparing to travel again. The warrior approached the woman and handed her a piece of hide wrapped around food. "Eat," he said simply. She took it, unsure how to respond. He turned to her daughter and offered her a small carved figure made from bone, a bird with outstretched wings. The little girl hesitated, then took it shyly. "Why are you doing this?" the woman asked. The warrior didn't answer right away. "Your child should not fear me," he said finally. "Fear makes people foolish." Then he turned and walked away. As they rode out of the valley, the woman began to notice small details she hadn't before, the faint smoke trails far off in the distance. The careful way the warriors avoided certain ridges, the way they spoke in low voices when the wind changed direction. They were being cautious, as if hiding from something. That realization chilled her more than anything else. It wasn't just her life that was in danger. Something larger was unfolding, and she had no idea what it was. By midday, they reached a narrow gorge where the trail split in two. The warrior signaled the group to stop. He spoke with the others in his language, his voice low and firm. The woman couldn't understand the words, but she caught the tension in their tone. The younger men looked uneasy. One of them pointed toward the north, where a faint dust cloud rose against the horizon. The warrior's jaw tightened. Whatever it wasn't good. He turned back toward the woman. "You stay close. Do not speak, do not run." His tone left no room for argument. Her heart pounded as they urged the horses forward again, following the narrow pass between the rocks. The dust cloud behind them grew larger. The woman could hear distant thunder not from the sky, but from horses. Riders. Someone was coming. The Apache warriors quickened their pace, but they didn't panic. The leader's calm never broke. He guided them through winding paths that twisted like a maze, always one step ahead. The woman held her daughter tight, every muscle tense. She could feel the fear radiating through the group, even as they tried to hide it. When they finally stopped at the mouth of a canyon, the warrior dismounted and motioned for silence. The woman could hear it clearly now, the echo of hooves, closer than before. Whoever was following them was fast. The Apache looked toward the horizon, his eyes narrowed. Then he turned to her and said quietly, "If they find us, you stay with me. No matter what happens." She opened her mouth to ask who they were, but he had already moved toward his horse, checking his weapon. The other warriors spread out, blending into the rocks like shadows. The sound grew louder, filling the canyon with a low rumble. The woman's heart raced as she crouched beside her daughter, clutching her clothes. The child's small body trembled against her. Sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the ground. The waiting was unbearable. And then, out of the dust, dark shapes appeared, riders, their coats long, and rifles gleaming in the fading light. They weren't Apaches. They were white men. Soldiers or hunters, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that they were coming fast. The Apache warrior turned slightly, his hand raised in a silent signal. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The woman didn't know who she feared more, the men chasing them, or the one standing beside her. She only knew that whatever came next would decide their fate, and the wilderness around them would remember. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of gunpowder, dust, and danger. The Apache warrior's hand tightened on his rifle as the riders drew near. The silence broke as the first echoing shot rang out across the canyon. The first shot shattered the stillness like lightning splitting the sky. The woman flinched, instinctively pulling her daughter down behind a boulder. The echo rolled through the canyon, followed by shouting in both English and Apache. The smell of dust and gunpowder filled the air. The Apache warriors moved swiftly, their movements sharp and silent. They took cover among the rocks, returning fire with quick precision. Arrows hissed through the air, striking against stone and metal. The woman pressed her child close, whispering for her not to look. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. From where she hid, she could see the Apache leader crouched behind a low ridge, his rifle steady. His expression didn't waver, even as bullets struck the ground near him. He gave orders in his language, calm but firm, and his men obeyed without hesitation. The white riders on the other side, soldiers, she realized, were forcing their way forward, their horses panicking in the confined space. The canyon's echo turned every sound into chaos. One of the Apache men fell, his cry sharp and short. The woman covered her daughter's ears, but she couldn't block the horror. She wanted to run, to hide deeper in the rocks, but she didn't dare move. Every shadow felt alive, every breath too loud. The warrior turned briefly toward her, his eyes catching hers. He motioned with his hand for her to stay low. Even through her fear, she understood. He wasn't protecting her out of kindness. She was valuable somehow, a piece in whatever struggle this was. The gunfire slowed, replaced by the fading sound of hooves. The soldiers had pulled back, regrouping beyond the canyon's edge. The air was thick with dust and smoke. The woman lifted her head slightly, her pulse still racing. The Apache leader stood slowly, scanning the distance. One of his men spoke quickly to him, pointing toward the north. The warrior nodded grimly. "They will come again," he said in English, his voice low. "More of them." He turned to her, his face drawn but calm. "You move now?" She hesitated. "Where?" "You're still out there." "We go through the mountain pass," he said, already signaling his men. "If we stay, we die." The woman swallowed her fear and helped her daughter to her feet. The child's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her small hands trembling. The warrior lifted her onto a horse and handed the reins to the woman. "Ride close behind me," he ordered. They moved quickly through the narrow pass, the sound of the soldiers fading behind them. The trail wound upward into higher ground, where pine trees grew thick and the air turned cool. The woman tried to focus on the rhythm of the horse's steps, but her mind kept racing. Who were those men? Had they been searching for her or for the Apache? She thought of her husband lying alone in the desert and felt her chest tighten. By the time the group reached a high ridge overlooking a wide valley, the sun was dipping low again. The warrior raised his hand, signaling for silence. They stopped, listening. Only the wind answered. He looked back toward the trail, then at her. "We stop here for now." She nodded, though exhaustion had already numbed her body. The others dismounted and began to set up a small camp. No one spoke more than a few words. The loss of their fallen comrade hung heavy in the air. As night settled, the woman sat beside her daughter near a small fire that gave off little light. The Apache leader sat a few yards away, his knife glinting faintly as he carved something from a piece of wood. The woman watched him for a long time before speaking. "Those men who attacked, who were they?" He didn't look up. "Soldiers. Why are they chasing you?" she asked quietly. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "They call us enemies," he said. "Call them thieves." He went back to carving, the blade scraping softly. "They take our land, our water, our people. They burn what they cannot keep." His voice was calm, but the bitterness in it was deep. "You are caught between them and us now." She stared at the flames. "I didn't ask for any of this. No one asks," he said. "The land chooses who suffers." The silence stretched between them. She thought of his words and how they mirrored the pain in her own heart. She too had lost everything: her home, her husband, her safety. But there was still something inside her that refused to give up. She looked at her sleeping daughter and knew she couldn't afford to break. Later that night, she woke to voices. The fire had burned low, and the air had turned cold. Two of the younger Apache men were arguing quietly in their language. Their tone was tense, almost angry. The leader stood nearby, his expression unreadable. The woman couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the fear behind them. The younger men gestured toward her and the child, their hands sharp and agitated. One of them pointed back toward the direction they'd come from. The woman's stomach tightened. The leader finally spoke, his tone firm and final. The others fell silent. One of them threw a handful of dirt into the fire before stalking away into the shadows. The woman could feel the unease in the camp, like a storm gathering. The warrior caught her watching and said quietly, "Some of my men think you bring danger. Soldiers will follow." She swallowed hard. "Will they?" He nodded. "They want you back, but not to save you. You are proof to them. They will use your story to tell more lies." His gaze darkened. "That is how they make war." She didn't understand fully, but she sensed truth in his words. The world she thought she knew felt smaller with each passing hour. The next morning, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. They rode deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around them. The air smelled of rain and pine. The woman could hear her daughter humming softly, the small sound somehow both comforting and heartbreaking. The Apache leader rode ahead, his shoulders straight, his eyes always scanning. As the day wore on, the terrain grew rougher. They crossed a cold stream and followed a narrow trail that led to a hidden clearing. It was there that the woman first saw the signs of settlement: small lodges made from poles and hides, smoke rising faintly from a few fires. Children's voices carried on the wind. She realized they had reached an Apache camp. The group was greeted by several older men and women. The leader spoke to them in his language, his tone low and serious. The woman could feel the weight of their stares on her and the child. Some looked with curiosity, others with suspicion. A few of the women came forward, offering water and blankets. The woman accepted them gratefully, bowing her head in thanks. Her daughter clung to her, hiding her face. Inside one of the shelters, they were given a place to rest. The space was warm and dim, smelling of smoke and herbs. The woman felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly for the first time since the night of the attack. But peace didn't last long. She could hear voices outside, the sound of a heated discussion. The leader's voice stood out among them, steady and strong. That night, When he came to check on them, she asked what was happening. He sighed, his usual calm breaking just a little. Some want to send you away before the soldiers come.
Oh.
Others think keeping you here will bring danger. I told them I will decide. His words made her uneasy. Why would you risk your people for us? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment before replying, Because I took you. Now you are my responsibility. His tone carried a quiet resolve that unsettled her even more. There was something deeper behind it, something that felt like guilt. She wondered if he regretted his choice that night by the wagon, when he could have left her and the child behind. But she didn't ask. There was a distance between them that neither dared to cross. As days passed, she began to see glimpses of life within the camp. The Apache women worked with skill and grace, tending fires and preparing food. The men sharpened weapons, taught the boys to ride, and kept watch from the ridges. Despite the fear that lingered, there was a sense of unity among them, a bond she couldn't help but admire. Yet danger was never far away. Scouts returned one evening with news that soldiers had been seen near the foothills. The camp grew tense, preparations quiet but urgent. The woman could see it in the leader's face, the weight of decisions pressing down on him. That night, as the firelight flickered across his face, he said quietly, If they come, I will not let them take you. She stared at him, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Why? She whispered. His eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. Because too many things have already been taken. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and smoke. The woman held her daughter close, her heart heavy with fear and questions. Somewhere beyond the dark hills, soldiers were closing in. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was coming next. The storm rolled in at dusk, thick clouds gathering low over the mountains. The first drops of rain hit the dry earth like whispers, darkening the ground in uneven patches. The Apache camp was tense and silent, the smell of smoke heavy in the air. The woman could sense the unease that clung to everyone. The warriors moved with quiet urgency, checking weapons and whispering to one another. Even the horses were restless, shifting nervously as the wind picked up. She sat inside the small shelter with her daughter, who clutched the little carved bird the Apache leader had given her. The girl's eyes were wide, her small face pale in the dim light. Mama, are they coming? She asked. The woman hesitated before answering. I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll stay together, no matter what happens. She brushed her hand through the girl's tangled hair, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Outside, the Apache leader stood beneath a pine tree, watching the horizon. The distant thunder was getting louder, though it was hard to tell whether it came from the storm or from something else. A young scout ran up to him, breathing hard, and spoke quickly in their language. The leader's expression tightened. He glanced toward the shelter where the woman sat, then back to his men. After a short command, the warriors began to move some to the ridge, others toward the horses. The storm would soon cover their trail, but it could also trap them if the soldiers came too soon. The woman stepped out into the rain as the leader approached. What's happening? She asked. His face was calm, but his eyes held tension. The soldiers are near, he said. They have trackers. They will reach this valley by nightfall. Her breath caught. Then we have to leave now. He shook his head. If we ride now, they will see the movement in the open land. We wait until the rain grows heavier. It will hide us. The wind howled through the trees, bending the branches like brittle arms. She could hear the low murmurs of the warriors preparing for what might come. She turned toward the leader again, her voice trembling. If they catch us, ... what will they do? He didn't answer right away. His silence was enough. When he finally spoke, his words were soft but sure. You stay near me. You and your child, no one else. The storm broke fully then, the rain pouring down in thick sheets. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the valley for a moment before darkness swallowed it again. The Apache leader gave a signal, and the camp began to move quickly but quietly. The woman helped her daughter onto the horse, her hands shaking. The thunder drowned out almost every sound as they rode through the trees, following the narrow path that led up toward the cliffs. The trail was slick and steep, the horses struggling to keep their footing. The woman's dress clung to her legs, soaked through. Every gust of wind seemed ready to knock her off balance. Behind them, the The camp they had just left vanished under the curtain of rain. Ahead, the path twisted upward into blackness. The warrior rode at the front, glancing back often to make sure they were still close. For a moment, the woman thought they might escape unseen. But then came a faint sound beneath the thunder, a distant crack of rifles. The horses jolted, the warriors tensing instantly. The woman's heart stopped. The soldiers had found them. The leader turned sharply in his saddle. "Ride!" he shouted. The word cut through the storm like a blade. They urged the horses forward, hooves splashing through the mud, branches whipping across their faces. The gunfire grew louder, echoing through the trees. Bullets struck bark, splinters flying. The woman bent low over her horse, shielding her daughter with her arms. Her chest burned with every breath, but she didn't dare stop. The Apache riders fanned out, some doubling back to draw the pursuers away. When the trail opened into a rocky clearing, the leader raised his hand, signaling for her to stop. The rain had begun to slow, leaving behind a thin mist. He turned toward her, his face set with grim focus. "You go this way," he said, pointing toward a narrow ravine. "Stay close to the rocks. Do not make a sound." "What about you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I will hold them off," he said simply. She shook her head fiercely. "No, you can't. You'll be killed." He met her eyes, rain dripping from his hair. "I have faced death before. This time it has meaning." Before she could answer, another shot rang out, closer than before. The leader grabbed the reins of her horse and shoved them toward the ravine. "Go. Now." She clutched her daughter tightly and urged the horse forward, the sound of battle fading behind her as the ravine closed around them. The air was heavy and wet, the smell of earth and smoke clinging to every breath. The path narrowed until she had to dismount and lead the horse by hand. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, she realized how quiet it had become. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, the storm moving farther away. She could no longer see the glow of fire or hear the clash of gunfire. She wanted to believe they were safe, but every instinct told her they weren't. Her daughter looked up at her, eyes wide with fear. "Mama, where is he?" The woman swallowed hard. "He'll find us soon," she said softly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She tied the horse to a tree and gathered the girl into her arms. The ravine offered some shelter from the wind, but the cold seeped into her bones. She couldn't stop shaking, not just from the chill, but from the weight of everything pressing down on her. Far off, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hooves. She froze. It was impossible to tell if it was friend or enemy. She pressed her daughter's face against her shoulder, holding her breath. The sound grew louder, closer, echoing off the canyon walls. A shadow appeared at the bend ahead. For one agonizing second, she thought it was Himtha, Apache warrior, returning for them. But when the figure came into view, she saw the uniform coat glinting faintly in the pale light. A soldier. She grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her back, searching desperately for a place to hide. There was nowhere, only slick rock and thin brush. The soldier spotted the movement instantly. "Stop!" he shouted, raising his rifle. The woman froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. The soldier dismounted slowly, his weapon still aimed. "You're safe now, ma'am," he said, his voice rough over the sound of dripping rain. "We've been tracking those savages for days. You're lucky we found you." She didn't move. Every word felt like a lie. "There are more of them," she whispered. "You have to leave." The man smirked. "Don't worry, we'll deal with them." He took a step closer. "Where's your husband?" Her throat tightened. "He's dead." The soldier's expression softened briefly, but his eyes held something else. Curiosity, maybe greed. "Then you've been with them all this time?" he asked. "The Apache?" She didn't answer. The soldier's tone grew sharper. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "No." He frowned, lowering his gun slightly. "No." Before he could say more, a sudden sound sliced through the stillness, a single arrow striking the ground near his boots. The soldier jerked back, startled. From the shadows above the ravine, figures appeared, dark, silent, and deadly. The Apache warriors had followed. The soldier raised his rifle, but it was too late. Another arrow hit his shoulder and he fell to the ground, cursing. The woman backed away, pulling her daughter behind her. From the ridge above, the Apache leader appeared, his face hard and cold in the dim light. He descended the slope with sure steps, stopping over the fallen soldier. The man on the ground looked up, blood seeping through his coat. "You'll hang for this?" he spat. The warrior said nothing. He turned his gaze to the woman. "I told you to stay hidden." She could barely find her voice. "They were coming. I couldn't." He cut her off with a glance. "There is no time. More will come." He motioned to his men. "You move." The woman followed, still trembling. The rain began again, soft but steady. They climbed higher into the mountains, the air turning colder. Every step felt heavier than the last. Behind them, the valley disappeared into fog. As night fell, they stopped at a narrow plateau overlooking a deep gorge. The wind howled around them, carrying the faint smell of smoke and ash. The warrior stood at the edge, staring into the distance. The woman joined him quietly. "How long can we keep running?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was low. "Till the land decides who it wants to keep." She looked out at the endless wilderness stretching below. Somewhere beyond it, soldiers were regrouping, anger burning in their hearts. Somewhere behind her, her daughter slept fitfully by the fire. And beside her stood a man who had taken everything from her, and yet somehow was the only one keeping her alive. The night pressed close around them. Thunder rolled once more in the distance, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The woman felt it in her chest, the sense that something was coming, something that would break everything wide open before the dawn. The next morning came quietly, with a pale sun pushing through the mist. The air was cool and still, the storm having passed in the night. The woman woke slowly, her body sore from the long journey and the fear that had weighed on her for days. Her daughter was still asleep beside her, wrapped tightly in a blanket. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence around them wasn't filled with danger. It was almost peaceful. The Apache leader stood nearby, watching the horizon. His figure looked smaller against the wide stretch of mountains and sky. When she joined him, he didn't speak at first. The ground was soft under their feet, the smell of pine sharp in the morning air. "Finally," he said quietly, "they will not follow us this far. The land ends for them here." She nodded, not sure what to say. The exhaustion in his voice carried more than just the weight of the past night. It held years of loss, struggle, and sacrifice. She could see it in the way he stood, straight but heavy, like a tree that had weathered too many storms. "What happens now?" she asked. He glanced toward the valley below. "We find a place where the soldiers will not come. There are still people who live free beyond those ridges." His eyes softened a little when he looked at her. "You and your child will be safe there." She hesitated. "And you?" He didn't answer right away. The wind brushed through the trees, carrying the sound of distant birds. "My path is not the same as yours," he said finally. "I must go back." Her heart tightened. "Back? But why? They'll kill you if you return." He met her gaze with calm strength. "There are others still trapped, my people. I cannot leave them behind." His words were steady, but there was something unspoken behind them, something like acceptance. The woman looked down at the small fire they had built, the smoke curling lazily upward. She knew he was right. He belonged to the land in a way she never could. His fight was not one he could walk away from, even after everything he had lost. She wanted to argue, to beg him to stay, but deep down she knew that would be selfish. Her daughter stirred, rubbing her eyes and whispering softly, "Mama." The woman knelt beside her and smiled. "We're safe now." The child looked around, then spotted the warrior. "Is he coming with us?" she asked. The woman hesitated, glancing toward him. "For a little while," she said gently. "But he has things he needs to do." The girl nodded slowly, though her small face showed disappointment. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the carved wooden bird he had given her. She held it out to him shyly. "You should take it, so you don't forget us." The Apache leader crouched down to her level, taking the little bird in his rough hands. He studied it for a moment, then shook his head and pressed it back into her palm. "No," he said softly. "You keep it, so you remember that the land remembers you." The girl smiled faintly, and the woman felt tears sting her eyes. By midday, they began to move again. The path wound down through a series of narrow ridges where wildflowers grew between the stones. The air smelled fresh, washed clean by the storm. The woman followed behind the warrior, her daughter riding quietly in front of her. Every so often, she would look back toward the peaks they had left behind, half expecting to see riders or smoke. But the sky remained clear. When they reached a high overlook that faced the open valley, the warrior stopped. Below, the land stretched endlessly, painted in shades of gold and green. A river glimmered in the distance, snaking through the trees. It was beautiful, untouched, and for a moment it felt like the world before war and sorrow. "This is where we part ways," he said finally. The woman felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. She dismounted slowly, unsure what to say. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You saved us." "You didn't have to, but you did." He shook his head. "You saved me first." "That debt is balanced." He turned slightly, looking toward the horizon. "What matters now is what you do next. You must keep moving until you find people who will help you. There are settlers near the far ridge. They are not soldiers. They will take you in." She nodded, biting her lip to keep her voice steady. "And if they ask who we are?" He looked at her with a faint smile. "Tell them you are just travelers who survived the storm." The woman reached out and touched his arm lightly. "I'll never forget you," she said. He nodded once, a quiet acceptance. Then, without another word, he turned his horse and began to ride back toward the mountains. The sound of his horse's hooves faded slowly until there was nothing but wind and the distant cry of an eagle. For a long time she stood there watching the place where he had disappeared. Her daughter came to her side, holding the carved bird tightly. "Mama, will we see him again?" The woman knelt beside her and brushed the hair from her face. "I don't know," she said softly, "but wherever he goes, he'll be all right. The land will watch over him." They began their descent into the valley. The day stretched long, but the fear that had followed them for so long began to lift little by little. The sound of the river grew stronger as they drew closer, the water shining under the sun. When they reached the banks, the woman let her daughter play for a while, laughing as she tried to catch the ripples with her hands. It was the first real laughter she had heard from her in days. As the sun started to dip behind the hills, they found a small cabin near the edge of the woods. Smoke rose gently from its chimney, and a man appeared in the doorway, surprised to see them. He was older, with kind eyes and rough hands. After hearing her story, at least the parts she could tell, he offered them food and a place to rest. She thanked him, her heart easing for the first time in what felt like years. That night, as her daughter slept soundly beside her, she stepped outside. The stars were bright and endless, stretching across the sky. She looked toward the distant mountains, where she knew the Apache leader was still out there somewhere. She wondered if he was looking at the same stars, if he was thinking of the people he'd lost, or the small child who had given him a piece of hope when he least expected it. She whispered softly into the night, "Thank you." The wind stirred the grass around her, gentle and familiar, almost as if answering back. She stood there for a long while, breathing in the quiet peace that had finally settled over the land. The fear, the pain, the endless running it, all began to fade into memory. What remained was something quieter, stronger, survival, connection, the understanding that sometimes the people who enter our lives for a short time leave behind something that never truly goes away. When morning came, she packed what little they had and began helping the man with chores around the cabin. Her daughter followed, laughing as she carried small buckets of water. Life slowly began to rebuild itself, piece by piece. But every so often, the woman would glance toward the mountains. And though she never saw him again, she felt his presence there, in the whisper of the wind through the pines and the cry of the hawk high above, in the strength that carried her through each new day. The land that had once brought her fear now felt like home, full of memory and meaning. She realized that the warrior had been right all along. The land decides who it keeps. And somehow, in its vastness, it had kept a part of all of them. As the seasons passed, the scars of the past grew lighter. The woman and her daughter learned to live again, not in fear, but in gratitude. Sometimes at night, the girl would hold the small carved bird in her hands and ask her mother to tell the story once more. About the man who had fought the soldiers, the storm that saved them, and the journey that taught them what courage really meant. And every time, the woman would smile and say, "It's not just a story, my love. It's a memory of how people in the land hold on to each other, even when the world tries to tear them apart." The mountains stood quiet in the distance, unchanged and eternal, guarding their secrets. Somewhere within that silence, the spirit of the Apache warrior still lived strong, proud, and free, etched into the heart of the land that had shaped them all.